We just want to say welcome to everybody that is joining us tonight. This is a special event, absolutely, that's happening from PAC 130 here in Pflugerville, Texas. This is a special edition of the program, and we're joined tonight by many different groups across not just the United States, not just Texas, but actually the world that are joining us from what I've heard on the invite list. We want to say that welcome to the Waterloo District, the Capital Area Council, Ms. Josette. We also have some people joining us from the Girl Scouts of America out of Washington, D.C. Capital Area Council Cub Resident Director, Program Ranger, and Resident Silver Beaver Award recipient, Ms. Shea, National Council volunteer through Scouts BSA and founder of the Facebook page All About Scouting for families and leaders in scouting with 10,000 members worldwide, Miss Victoria. National Council volunteer and founder of the Facebook page Cub Masters Corner for Cub Masters around the world, Scott Larson. We're also joined overseas by scouting units in India, Scout Troop Cape Maclear, with over 1,500 scouts in Mwawe, Africa, led by Scoutmaster Overton, and the first Air Scout group in Guam, led by Scouting Commissioner Nana. Inside of there, we have a very exciting show for you this evening. Tonight we are joined by astronaut Raja Chari. PAC 130 is... Sorry, Raja, go ahead.
I was just saying hi.
All right. PAC 130 is also joined by our charter organization representative to PAC 130 from the St. Episcopal's Church here in Pflugerville, Texas, Mr. Tom Fine. So thank you very much, Astronaut Raja, for being on the program today. Inspiring scouts around the world are interested in many other things, and we have quite a few questions that are also coming to us from different scouts, both inside our pack as well as scouts inside of there. So our scouts would like to know, how young were you when you became interested in space?
So that's a good question. And I have asked my mom, actually, once I wound up down at NASA, because I couldn't exactly remember. So I think, I'm sure just like a lot of you guys, I was interested in flying and space at a young age, but I don't exactly remember. When I look back at it, I couldn't exactly remember when. And I think it's because at some point in your life, you start to think like, oh, I surely can't be an astronaut. So you kind of tell yourself to focus on something else. But it turns out, I think she found some pictures of me when I was as young as 5 and 6 years old, with pictures of space and rockets. And then apparently I had taken the drape hooks off the curtains at the house at one point and was selling them to other kids in the street. I was selling them as X-Wing fighters. So I took the drape hooks down and bent the wings out, or bent the metal out, and sold them for $0.25, which made me a small fortune, probably like $1.25, but apparently did not go over well at home when my mom couldn't close the drapes anymore. So it was a pretty young age. I think I was interested in space. And then as I got into middle school and high school, I think that evolved towards wanting to fly and being a pilot. And then it wasn't until later in my life that I started looking back again and realizing, oh man, I could actually wind up in this astronaut job. It was pretty young.
Gotcha. So $1.25 as a kid, that's quite a bit of money there.
That's a small fortune in 1982. Yeah.
So could you tell us more about how you actually became an astronaut?
Sure. So the actual process. So in my class, there's 11 U.S. astronauts and 2 Canadians, and we all trained together. And so the process. So I actually applied in 2013. 2013, and made it through the interviews, but didn't get selected then, and then applied again in 2017 and was selected in that class. And so the actual process is about a 2-year-long process. So you sign up online, submit a resume, references, and then they basically whittle down that list and then interview people. And then there's a week-long interview process that's a bunch of tests, a lot of skills tests, technical tests, a lot of team building tests, and then they whittle that down again to a last group of 50 people and do another week-long set of interviews. And then after that, they pick the final class. But our actual class is a pretty wide mix of background. So I am an Air Force pilot and test pilot, and that was my path. But there's about half our class is not military. It's about half guys and girls. We have doctors, we have a biologist, we have an aerospace engineer, an oceanographer, thick engineer. So a really wide array of backgrounds in the class. So really anyone with a science or technical or engineering background that has a master's degree is technically eligible. And then the added thing is, some technical skill with also some operational experience, and kind of what you guys are doing in scouting is exactly that. So the ability to, adapt to things outdoors, problem solve, know how to come up with solutions. It's a lot of as you guys get older and start doing campouts and things like that, that was, a key part of my youth when I was a kid, being a Boy Scout and learning how to, it's hard these days. If you guys are near the Austin area, it's not like you're living out in the woods on a daily basis. But when you go camping and do those kind of outdoor experiences, you get a chance to actually use your mind and solve problems that you don't have to on a daily basis.
So I saw that you grew up in Iowa, correct?
I did, yep.
So camping and doing all of those outdoor adventures, are there any that kind of stick in your mind today that kind of help shape who you are and what you became?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So we had a thing called the red flannel badge. I don't know if they still have that in Scouts or not, but that basically means that you go out and you camp when it's below freezing. And so in Iowa, in the upper Midwest in general, most of the winter from about October, November through March or April is all pretty cold and snowy. And so got some good experience camping out there and learning how to stay warm. And that several times in my career has come in handy. So in the Air Force, I've had to do survival training multiple times to include what we call Arctic survival. So at one point I was flying F-15s in Alaska. I was assigned there. And so as part of the training there, we do an Arctic survival course to make sure that if you eject in the mountains and in the extreme temperatures there, that you can survive. And it was definitely very familiar to me. A lot of old memories came back of old Boy Scout camping trips in the cold and trying to stay warm. And then similarly, we do a thing as part of our astronaut training called NOLS, which is the National Outdoor Leadership School. And it's actually kind of like a really advanced Boy Scout camping trip, honestly. So you're out there surviving, having to get from point A to point B across ravines or across very dangerous territory and rappel or set up rope bridges. And so all the kinds of things that we had some exposure to in Scouts. Again, a lot of these experiences in my life as I've trained, I've often thought to myself, it's kind of like a Boy Scout trip on steroids. So in the Air Force, we do a thing called evasion and resistance training to prepare pilots for being shot down behind enemy lines. So it's kind of like Boy Scouts, except someone's hunting you down. So there's definitely a lot of my Boy Scout, I'd say, outdoor skills were very helpful as I progressed and had a lot of that skill set for the basic survival and just not being intimidated by the outdoors and being comfortable with being outside. And that's something even actually now, even with the virus restrictions just this past week and weekend, as you guys know, in Texas, it's been beautiful weather. So we had the tent set up in the backyard out there just camping instead of sleeping inside just to enjoy the weather.
Yeah, me and my boys will very often just house camp right on a deck out back and just set up the tent there.
That's exactly what we do. Yeah, we're like 20 feet from the house in case anyone has to go to the bathroom or get food, but it's still kind of cool just to go outside and sleep and listen to the sounds around you. Yeah,
and you had mentioned, was it the Arctic badge for camping below?
We call it the red flannel badge, yeah, when you camp below freezing. I don't know if that's still what they call it today, but.
Well, here in Texas, a lot of the Pack 130 group has the Texas Toast, which is camping above 100 degrees. So that was something a bunch of us had earned, a bunch of the scouts had earned last year. Ken, I believe we have you back, correct?
Yes, hi. This is Cubmaster Ken. I am back. I had connection problems. I am back. I'm very happy to meet you, Mr. Astronaut Raja Chari. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Oh, no problem. Happy to be here, Ken.
Thank you. Well, so I believe we discussed some questions that we asked for you. Do you have any other cool stories you could share us, or are you ready to? We can go into some scout questions.
Sure. Well, I'll happily take the scout questions. I'll fill in stories as we go, if that's okay.
Outstanding. Okay, so I believe we have Cub Scout Pack 130 from Pflugerville, Texas, in the audience wanting to ask some questions to you. I think we have first up, let's see, Easton. If Easton can go ahead and ask away.
How do you sleep in space? And how do you keep ice cream cold in space?
Okay, so Easton asked, how do you sleep in space, and how do you keep ice cream frozen in space? So sleeping depends on the person. So the people who are on the space station right now, they have what are called crew quarters, which are about the size of like a shower that you stand in. So if you imagine if anyone has a shower that's just a shower, not a tub, that you would go inside and stand in, that's about the size of what they sleep in. And then up against one wall, so if they walk in, there's a sleeping bag velcroed to the wall, and then they go inside that sleeping bag and sleep. Some people like to free float, meaning they just like to just be free. Most people, though, like to be attached to something to have sort of the feeling of being secure. So if you think about how you guys sleep on Earth, some of you may like to have like a heavy blanket. Some of you might just have a sheet on you. Some people might not have anything on them. And that's kind of the same in space. Some people want to feel like they're really in tight. So on the space shuttle, they would use like bungee cords, and they could really wrap you up. Some people just like to be floating loose. The one thing that's really different in space is so on Earth, when you breathe out, carbon dioxide comes out of your nose. So you breathe oxygen in, and carbon dioxide comes out. And on Earth, with gravity, that carbon dioxide naturally goes to the ground and away from your nose. In space, though, it actually, that carbon dioxide, it kind of makes a bubble around you and sticks to your face. So imagine like you're blowing a bubble gum bubble, that gas sticks to you. And so where you sleep in space, there has to be airflow, so a fan or some kind of vent that's blowing air across your mouth and nose, because otherwise you'll suffocate yourself while you're sleeping, because that gas bubble will just envelop your head and you'll pass out. So that's only the only real restriction in sleeping in space is be somewhere where there's airflow to break up the carbon dioxide. And then the second question of how do you, well, I guess the other thing that people will do is usually they wear earplugs and then some kind of eye mask. So a lot of times there's other work going on the space station because we're always trying to do science. And so sometimes people will be sleeping and other people will be working. So you'll usually have earplugs and an eye mask as well to kind of help. In terms of keeping ice cream cold, so ice cream's a pretty rare treat in space. So you guys have probably seen like the freeze-dried ice cream where you can put water in it and it kind of tastes like ice cream, the astronaut ice cream, but it's not really as good. But sometimes when they bring up cargo vehicles, they'll actually have real ice cream. And what they'll actually use is they have the same freezers that we use for some of the science experiments that are super cold. As soon as the cargo vehicle gets up there, they can try to get that ice cream out and get it into the freezer and keep it for a little while. But it does take room away from science experiments, so it's usually like maybe a pretty small amount of ice cream. So it's a kind of special treat to actually have real ice cream up there.
So as a follow-up to the ice cream, what is the favorite ice cream flavor?
That's a good question. I think it's pretty personal. I'm kind of a cake batter or birthday cake ice cream flavor person myself, but I think honestly the two most popular things are up there are fresh fruit and tortillas are very popular things to get up there fresh. As the tortillas you don't have a whole lot of bread and things up there, so you can use that to mix with a whole bunch of different things, and it doesn't leave crumbs. So that's the other popular item.
Oh, that's great. Next up, we have Nicholas, Cub Scout Nicholas. Are you available, Nicholas? All right, his question real quick was, how do you exercise in space?
Okay, so how do you exercise in space? So the exercising is important for two really big reasons, and the most important one is, so when you're in space, so when you're standing on the ground on Earth, your body is always fighting gravity. So your legs are always keeping you upright, your back is always keeping your head up, but when you're in space, those muscles and bones aren't having to work. And so what happens is very quickly, actually, your body adjusts to that, and the density of your bones starts going down. What actually happens is the thickness of the bones goes down, and the density. So they get smaller, and they get less less dense or less packed in. And that's fine as long as you were to stay in space, but what happens is when you come back to Earth, if you have very thin and brittle bones, then if you were to fall or trip, you could break your bones. So it's almost like it's very equivalent to what happens to elderly people, where they become more prone to falls and breaking bones. The same thing can happen to astronauts. So the biggest reason we have to exercise is to fight that bone loss. And so most of the exercise we do focuses on the areas that we see the most bone loss, which is your hips and your low back, and trying to maintain that area. So what we do for exercise, if anyone's ever seen a Bowflex machine, it's very similar to that. It's like an at-home gym system, except instead of using rubber bands, we use these big hydraulic pistons. They're about the size of like a tree trunk, and then the resistance of that piston is what you're using, is what you're lifting against. And so it's one machine that you can reconfigure different ways. You can do squats or deadlifts, and you move this bar and the rack around so that you can exercise different muscles. So that's the weight part of it. And then we also have to do a cardio part of it. And so there's a treadmill on the space station. But if you can imagine a treadmill when there's no gravity, you would float away from the treadmill. And so the way they do that in space is there's basically suspenders that go over your shoulders that are attached to the floor of the treadmill, and they pull your body down so that as you're running, you stay attached to the treadmill. And all told, the astronauts on the space station, they work out about 3 hours a day, which seems that's a lot compared to on Earth. If you think about normally, if you went to the gym for an hour a day on Earth, that would be a pretty intense workout. We have to do it for 3 hours a day up there because, again, on Earth, you're constantly working out, even though your body you don't think about it, you're always having to fight against gravity. And so it takes a dedicated effort to do that. The second reason we do it on space is it's a good way to sort of mentally, unwind or have a little bit of a break. So most of the astronauts' days on the space station are very, very scheduled. Every 15 minutes, are planned out, and you're going from one event to the next. And so during the workout time is sort of a chance for you to just not have to worry about work for a while and just focus on exercising.
All right. What is, by chance, what is something you do for fun in space?
So they do a bunch of, they have a bunch of different things. One of, I think, the most common one, or two common ones, I'd say, is a group meal. And so usually they'll try on the space station, usually at least once a week, they'll try to have kind of like a big family meal together. And everyone on the space station will bring something from maybe that's traditional from their country. So maybe some Russian food. If there's a Japanese astronaut or a European astronaut, everyone will try to bring something to that. So kind of like a little mini Thanksgiving. The other popular thing is to do movie nights. And so a lot of times what will happen is some of the Hollywood companies will send up a new movie before it actually comes out in the theaters, and then the astronauts will get to have like a movie night, maybe on a Friday or Saturday night, and they'll project it onto the wall or onto a sheet that they pull down and kind of sit around and just kind of relax and watch a movie for a few hours.
That's fun. And we have Julian, Cub Scout Julian, on the line. Are you available?
We're here. Go ahead.
Why do astronauts go into space?
That's a great question, Julian. Why would you go into space, you think?
That we can float.
You can float? That's a good idea.
I don't know.
So I think, at least I can tell you why I go and would want to go into space. I think everyone's got a similar answer, but maybe a little different for each person. But I think for all of us, it's the idea of exploring and going someplace that people haven't been and discovering new things. So I would say it's, why did people sail to the Americas? Why did people go to the North Pole? It's always this, I think as humans, we're a little different than other animals in that we have this desire to know more and to go farther. And so for me, that's what it's about, is to try to further humankind's knowledge. And I think, the current situation with, the coronavirus is a good example of there's a lot of technology and science that we're relying on to kind of help us with this. And that's all because of the work that people have done, pushing the bounds and, doing experiments and trying to understand the world around them. And the other thing I think that's important to me is trying to come up with technologies that will help us here on Earth. And so a lot of the same things we need to work on the moon and Mars in terms of manufacturing water and the supplies we need to survive are very useful here on Earth. So if we can figure out a way where we can survive with very limited resources, that helps everyone here on Earth.
That's a fascinating.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you.
How about Cub Scout Jacob? You're up.
What kind of experiments do you do in NASA?
So what kind of experiments do we do at NASA, Jacob? Just about anything you can think of. So like I mentioned, our class has biologists, geologists, physicists, different kinds of engineers. And so the International Space Station is really a national lab. And so most of what they're doing all day long is experiments. So currently they're doing different experiments on growing plants in space. They're doing research on different types of treatments for cancer. So there's a lot of work I would say, a lot of work that you can do in zero gravity that you can't do on Earth that has to do with materials and medicine. And the reason that's special about being in zero gravity is when you make new materials here on Earth, like if you try to imagine making a different kind of metal, so maybe like a different kind of chip for your phone or your computer, when you have gravity, the way those materials behave is different. And so in space, you're able to control some of those reactions better. It's also similar for a lot of medical research. The way cells form and the way you can grow organs and things like that is much different in zero gravity than it is on the Earth. And so there's a lot of research like that happens on the space station to try to give scientists on the ground better ideas as to other ways you can manufacture or make things. There's also a whole bunch of other, like schools actually come up with experiments to send up there. There's a lot of experiments that have to do with, I mentioned before, like sustaining ourselves. So most of the water we drink on the space station is actually, we say the water we drink is yesterday's coffee, meaning that we're basically drinking our pee. Now it's not the pee that actually comes out, we filter it, but about almost 100% of the pee that comes out, we basically refilter and reuse as water. And so that kind of technology and experimenting, trying to get more efficient about that, is another type of research that goes on.
That's fascinating. We're going to jump down to Evelyn. Evelyn, with your question. Evie.
How heavy is your spacesuit?
So how heavy is our spacesuit? So we use, I'll talk faster since I'll try to get to everyone here. The spacesuit's over 400 pounds and it's not very comfortable. But when you're actually in space, it doesn't weigh anything. It's got mass, but because there's no gravity, it just floats. And so most of what we do in practice on the Earth is in the NBL, the Neutral Buoyancy Lab, the big pool. And in there, they use the water to try to offset the weight. And you're kind of floating in the water in the suit. They make it as comfortable as they can, but I'll tell you, it's when you come out of it, it feels like you've been in a fight. You're pretty beat up because all the joints are metal. So everywhere you have a joint on your body, that whole time you're fighting against the suit and trying to make it move. So it's not very comfortable, and it's a pretty good workout after you've been in it for a while.
That's outstanding. Thank you so much. All right, let's move down to Keegan, Cub Scout Keegan. All right, so Cub Scout Keegan is asking, how many times have you been in space?
So Keegan, I have not been to space yet. So I was in the 2017 class, so I am in the list of the assignable pool, meaning I can get assigned to a mission. Usually from the time you start as an astronaut to the time you fly is between 4 and 6 years. And then in our office, some people have flown once up to 2 or 3 times. So it just kind of depends on the person and how long they've been there. But all of us are training. Basically what happens is you have a basic set of skills, and then once you get assigned to a mission, you start learning that specific one. So for example, if you know the 6 months that you're on the space station, you'll start learning all those experiments and all the science you're going to be doing during that time and getting really good at that.
All right. Well, how about a follow-up question to Cub Scout Keegan? How high can you jump in space? That's a good question.
That is a good question. So And I guess so if you're in space, like in orbit, there is no limit. You would just keep going. So if you pushed off one end of the space station, and you can probably Google it and see some videos of the ISS of people just floating down. Because it's Isaac Newton, right? If you guys have probably learned about that in school, that an object in motion will stay in motion, and on Earth, that's what stops because of friction and drag from the air. But in space, neither of those things are there. So if you were to push off the wall of the space station, you just keep going until you hit something. There is no distance. Now, granted, the space station is about as big as a 5-bedroom house, so it'd be like if you jumped off your front door and then just kept floating until you hit the back door. But as long as you didn't hit something in between, you'll just keep going.
Wow. All right, Cub Scout Jackson, you're up.
What's your favorite thing you've done with NASA?
My favorite thing I've done with NASA, Jackson, good question. So I think my favorite thing has been going through the training with my 11 other classmates. And my favorite part of the training, I think, has been learning the spacewalk training that's in the pool, which is really, really tiring and really hard physically and mentally, but it's definitely been the most rewarding thing I've done here, and I've really enjoyed learning how to do that.
That's fascinating. All right, we have Cub Scout Caden. He's asking how. All right, this is a good question. How do you go potty in outer space?
Great question. So if you think of, so there's basically, it's hard to show you because I don't have, I'm in my house, so I can't show you the setup. But essentially, if you guys have used a funnel before, like if you've maybe poured oil into a car or had to pour liquid into a bottle, there's a funnel, all right? And I'll try to show it. So there's a funnel and then a hose coming out the bottom of the funnel. And so if you imagine on Earth, you could just go to the bathroom in the funnel and the pee would go down the funnel. In space, the problem is if any water is free, it's just going to start floating everywhere. And so in space, what they basically do is they have a vacuum that creates suction into the funnel. And so then you have to aim into the funnel and make sure you don't miss because that's a big mess. You have to get it into the funnel, and then the vacuum suction pulls it down the funnel. So that's for number one. For number two, similar, but you have to also have really good aim, and you line yourself up on a toilet that also has a vacuum in the bottom of it. And as you go to the bathroom, it helps pull it out and keep it contained. And then what you have to do is contain it in these plastic bags, and then we keep them in a separate storage area, and then we send it back on cargo vehicles that burn up in the atmosphere.
Wow. We have Cub Scout Prithvi that's on the line. Prithvi, would you like to ask a question?
Have you seen a star before, and is it fun to be in space?
Okay, I think you said, have I seen a star before? Yeah. Okay, I think the question was, have I seen a star before? So the answer is yes, and so have you guys. Right? Every day you guys see the sun, so that's the closest star to us. I think that's what you asked. And is it fun to be in space? I haven't been there, but absolutely, I would think so. Everyone who's been there says it's amazing, and that's why one of the big reasons I signed up. We've done some training where we go in a zero-G plane, so it's a special kind of plane that goes kind of up and down, sort of like a roller coaster, except it goes down for a really long time. And that whole time it's going down, you're experiencing zero-G. So we do that to kind of train how it feels. So the question before about how far would you go if you jumped, to learn things about the very light forces you need when you're in zero-G to not go slamming across the cabin and hurt yourself.
All right. Well, this concludes our special edition program today with astronaut Raja Chari. Thank you very much.
Thank you guys. Thanks, Pack 130, and thanks very much for having me.
Yes, and inspiring scouts around the world to reach for the stars. We'd like to all say, goodbye to you. So before we go, what I need is all scouts. We need Girl Scouts that are on. We need Scouts BSA Scouts that are on. We need scouts that are around the entire world. Every single one of you, what I'd like to see is have you raise up your arm really high. Raise up your arm really high and wave it as hard as you can. And what we're going to do is we're all going to say to astronaut Raja Chari a big thank you for being on the program today. And I want you to say it as loud as you can so that astronaut Raja Chari can hear you. So everyone keep waving. So are you ready? Okay. Let's go. I'm going to count to 3. 1, 2, 3.
Thank you guys. You're very welcome. Thanks for having me on. See ya.
Thank you so much.
Thank
You
you.
guys have a good night and stay safe. All right. See you guys.